Right, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Training for Hiking live Q&A. My name is Rowan, and today I'm answering your questions around training for hiking. Now, as always, the way these streams work is for anyone who is watching this live. If you do have any particular questions you want covered, you can pop them in the chat. I'm more than happy to answer them. On top of that, I've had a couple of questions sent through, which I'm going to be talking through in a bit of detail. And today we're really just talking about knee pain. We've got a question talking about knee pain on descents, very, very common situation for a lot of people, and also a question about knee pain on lunges. And anything else that pops up, we will cover. So with that being said, let's get into the first question. The question was, I'm doing a big hike in September. I recently did a steep overnight training hike and my knees were quite cranky by the end of it. I realized I need to do a bit more work before the hike begins. I find the downhill stuff affects me the most. What would be your suggestion to help me train for this downhill motion? Currently, I do a bit of weight training, but I'm unable to do squats and lunges due to needing a hip replacement. Any suggestions would be appreciated. So yeah, when it comes down to this situation, very, very common and realistically, downhill hiking, the biggest trigger for knee pain any hikers have, purely for the fact that going down hills, it puts a lot of extra stress through our knees. On top of that, when we have a pack on our back, that puts even more stress and it can be a big factor. Now, what I'm going to do and how I'm going to approach this, I'm going to give a bit of a longer term answer and a shorter term answer on how you may approach this. So, as a longer term thing, if you were in the situation where you had a bit of time ahead of you, you have multiple months of how we want to go about this, and we want to get on top of knee pain in the longer term, a few things we kind of want to work through. Now, on the training side of things, we want to really, really make sure that we are building up the strength, building up the endurance of the areas that are responsible for supporting the knees. Specifically, we want to be working the quadriceps, front of the thighs, hamstrings, back of the thighs, the glutes, so the bum muscles, and also the calves, so the lower limbs. Now, all of these are very, very, very important in regards to building up the knees, stabilizing the knees. And we want to be making sure we're being consistent with this type of thing through our week. As a longer term thing, following a strength training program of maybe two sessions a week, whatever it may be, can really, really go a long way. Next up, we want to be making sure we're doing a bit of mobility in the sense that one thing that can often help with knee pain on descents or knee pain in general is if we can improve our mobility in the areas or the joints above and below the knees. Essentially, if we can mobilize the ankles and the hips, which can often get quite restricted, this can actually be quite nice for the knees, help the knees move a little bit happier, and that can go a long way. Now, mobility does take a little while to develop, but that can be another area you can explore. Another thing is over time, we want to make sure during our training that we're doing some dedicated conditioning during the week to slowly expose the body to the specific stresses it's going to be facing on the trail and slowly but surely build that up and expose things. So, for example, you may start off doing some flat pack walking, introducing the body to weight, introducing the knees to weight, and getting it to build up resilience to that. Then you may progress to some stair or hill climbing, so finding a set of stairs or hills and slowly building that up. And then you may progress to some loaded stair and hill climbing, so actually putting on a back, doing that type of session, slowly building up your pack weight. And you may spend 4 weeks on here, 4 weeks on here, 4 weeks on there. That could be a really nice 12-week progression plan. And then finally, again, as a long-term thing, really thinking about what can you do to minimize fatigue. So one risk factor for knee pain on the trail is when we get tired, when muscles get fatigued or whatever it may be, that can be a risk factor for ramping up pain. So we want to think about what other things can we do to make sure we're getting through our hikes as comfortably as possible. We want to make sure we're following a slow and steady hiking plan, which builds up over time. We want to making sure that we are concentrating on our aerobic fitness in our training, and we want to make sure we're really, really nailing our fueling. And bit by bit by bit, we're building things up. As a long-term answer, that's a lot of information which can make a big, big, big difference in regards to the needs. And if anyone was interested in learning a bit more about that, I'm going to share this video for you. It's 40 minutes, it's a little bit long, but it does go through each of those things in a bit more detail. It gives examples in regards to particular muscles and particular exercises you can do, and it talks through in a lot more detail. So I just pop that in the chat so people can check that out in their own leisure. Now, that's a longer term answer. Obviously, September, None of that stuff, a lot of that stuff is just not going to be realistic. Don't have a huge amount of time. And realistically, if we're just looking about 3 to 4 weeks, depending on what time of December, September you're going, there isn't a huge amount of stuff you can do. Isn't going to be a huge amount of difference that we want to be able to make. There is some, but it usually does take a bit of a longer term approach. One thing, some people with the trap, some people do fall into in this situation is they'll get an answer to this and they'll be like, okay, I went and watched this. I saw some exercises that were useful for this. And they're like, hey, I'm just going to introduce all this new stuff right away. Realistically, I wouldn't recommend going too crazy in this next little period of just throwing in new things to the body. Because sometimes when we're doing new strength exercises or whatever it may be, it does take a little while to learn them, to figure them out, to get the body feeling comfortable. And we don't really want to risk just flaring up discomfort in these next weeks. Um, so we want to keep things pretty simple. A few very, very, very simple things you can do during this time, which can probably make a bit of a difference. First and foremost, gear. Two simple pieces of gear that can make a dramatic difference to knee pain on descents. Number one, trekking poles. If you're not using trekking poles, get a pair, practice them over the next few weeks. They can take a significant amount of pressure off the knees. And also a knee brace. If you just go online or go down to a local pharmacy, big pardon. Go down to a local pharmacy, get like a simple knee brace. You don't have to get anything too rigid or too crazy, but sometimes a little bit extra support can take a little bit and make a bit of a difference. Those things don't really require any effort. They're relatively affordable, and they can go a long way. Now, another thing you can look at doing is, as I sort of said, mobility in the ankles and the hips can often be useful. Even though in 3 to 4 weeks we don't want to introduce too much new stuff, which may risk aggravating the knees, you can be, mobility stuff is pretty gentle and you can be pretty confident. Yeah, you can fit that in. It should be good. As I said, hips and ankles, a couple of simple options for here. This can be a nice option for the hips, doing something like a hip flexor stretch with an overhead reach, where we're basically like one knee forward, one knee back, um, and basically just doing some reaches above the head. You should feel a nice stretch through there. This can be quite accessible for a lot of people. Very, very simple. In this particular situation, if you were sort of saying, hey, I need a hip replacement and hey, I have a bit of a discomfort there, if you are unsure about that, if it's at any level of discomfort or you're just not sure if stretching is the right idea for you, skip it. Don't mess around with that. If you're not sure, don't do it. The other area that you can work on is like the ankles. So a nice one for the ankles can be like the knee to wall stretch, where basically what we're doing, we're against a wall, we got 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, and we're just basically pushing the knee in the wall, feeling a bit of a stretch through the back of the calves. Now, the idea behind this is essentially we are actually improving our mobility so the knees can push over the toes, which is exactly what happens when we're going down hills. And if we can improve this mobility through the ankle, that can actually be quite nice when we're going down hills, allows our knee to move a bit more freely, and it can be quite useful. So that can be another option. And I'm popping these videos in the chat as well. So mobility can be something you can kind of lean into. And then finally, I would sort of say the most beneficial training you can do. And I would sort of say before I say that, mobility, do that stuff every day, can go a long way. And then finally, yeah, the best kind of training you can probably do during this time. As I said, strength training, I would argue about like, adding too much of that in realistically. One thing you can do is exploring exposure to the stimulus. So one thing that we want to do when we're looking at training and we're looking at knee pain on descents, we want to look at the specific trigger that is leading to pain. And we want to basically expose the body to that in a way that is controllable, in a way that is manageable, and slowly but surely make it a little bit harder, a little bit harder, a little bit harder. This can be really, really, really good at just conditioning the body, and in this case, conditioning the knees to this exact same issue and get it feeling a bit more comfortable. So in this situation, if we're aware that, okay, the knee gets uncomfortable on those descents, what we would probably look at doing is locally, you want to find a set of stairs or a hill, whatever you have access to. Essentially, what you want to do is you want to start doing a session where you're going up and down at a steady pace. Now, the key to this, it's not a case of just throwing yourself in the deep end and just absolutely flogging yourself and getting yourself uncomfortable, flaring up the knee. But you essentially want to start with an amount which is 100% comfortable on the knees. You want to figure that out. And the second your knee starts to talk at you, the second the knee starts to say, hey, it's a little bit uncomfortable, you stop and you finish up there. then essentially have a couple of days rest, do it again, and then try to next time just do a little bit more. Maybe do an extra couple of minutes or whatever it is. So, for example, you may start this and you may put a timer on. You may get to 10 um, minutes, and the knee starts to talk at you. You're like, oh, that's a little uncomfortable. Finish up there, have a couple of days off. Next time, go out and do 12 minutes. And then the knee starts talking to you. Next day, you do 14 minutes. And you can build this up a little bit, little bit, little bit, little bit. Obviously, 10 minutes of climbing, 12 minutes of climbing, 14 minutes of climbing, a little bit different to maybe doing an entire day on the trail. This is just a hypothetical example, but this can be one of the most simple ways where we can just get a good amount of exposure during this time without overdoing things. And this can be very, very, very useful just to help the knee. You do need to be careful with this. You need to be listen to those signs of the body. You don't want to overload things because again, if you're just 3 to 4 weeks from a trip, we don't want to absolutely flare things up. But that's probably the most useful thing. This type of stuff, it's stuff that I would do as a long-term thing for anyone struggling with knee pain. Try to expose that, but we can get a lot of benefit out of it in the short term. So hopefully that gives a few ideas. As I said, if you are looking at September, it can be a little bit tricky in regards to how much change you can make. But hopefully, a little bit of focus on the gear, a little bit of mobility, maybe a bit of exposure, that may be worth your time over this period. And the last thing I will sort of say, if you are unsure about any of this, go see a physio, see a physiotherapist, get some manual treatment, see what they have to say. It can definitely go a long way. So that's on them. Now, next question, also talking about knees, is knee pain on lunges? This is a good question I just got sent through yesterday, and it's something that comes up all the time, so definitely worthwhile chatting about. Is basically, I always get knee pain when doing lunges. Do you have any advice? Lunges are one of the most favorite exercises for hikers out there. Makes sense. Lunges are working very, very similar muscles for hiking. Very, very accessible, very, very doable, very, very, very common. One thing though, what we often see is pretty much everyone gets recommended lunges. Pretty much everyone gets given lunges, but realistically, I would never classify a lunge as a beginner exercise. Even though they're given to absolutely everyone, I would classify them as more of an intermediate exercise. And for me, with my hikers, I don't typically give people lunges straight away if they're kind of on the more beginner side of things. But anyway, you'll often get to this point. If you do struggle with knee pain on lunges, there's a few different bits and pieces you can try and play around with to help them be a bit more comfortable. Now, first and foremost, what I would recommend is instead of doing a lunge, so if you're in a class environment, working with a personal trainer, doing your own things, whatever it may be, for now, instead of doing a lunge, go back to a split squat. Now, what a split squat is, just for example, is the same thing as a lunge, same movement, but instead of stepping forward or stepping back, we're just in one position and we're just going up and down, up and down, up and down. Now, the idea behind this particular split squat is it just helps you control things a little bit more. It helps you keep things a little bit more steady, and it's definitely worthwhile using as opposed to a lunge initially if you struggle with it. This may still be really, really challenging, but I'm going to talk you through a few ideas in a moment on how to help. But this is a good way to just explore it. Now, first and foremost, really, really simple place to start is adding a little bit of support. So a lot of people will just say, hey, I can't do a lunge, it's completely beyond me, what it may be. But there are a lot of ways you can vary a lunge. Add a bit of support, take a bit of pressure off. One thing you can do is basically set yourself up next to a chair. One hand on a chair, one hand doing this, and literally hold onto a chair as you're going through. You can push up through the chair, you can use it for stability or whatever it may be, works pretty well. Another option is, as a hiker, you may have trekking poles. So using 1 or 2 trekking poles, hold onto that with your arms. Again, it'll stop you wobbling around. It'll take a bit of pressure off. Can be really, really, really useful. That's the first place to look at, and I think it's definitely worthwhile for a lot of people. Now, the second thing you can look at is reducing the range of motion. So oftentimes we look at these lunges and the split squats and we're like, hey, we've got to go all the way down to the floor. And if that's comfortable, yeah, that's fine. But a lot of people will find that they're like, hey, I'm pretty fine with the knees here, the knees here, the knees here. And it's just this last little bit where the knees get really uncomfortable. So how you can reduce this range of motion is basically you can get, if you're training at home, you can get like a book or 2 or 3 and pop it underneath this knee. Or if you're in the gym, there should be like little like pads or plates or whatever it may be. And what you can do is just line it up with under the knee. So each time that you come down, you start from the top, you come down, 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 and at that point, your back knee touches that book or touches that point. And you're like, that's my end point, and I go back up. And then Ideally, we want to find a range of motion where you can do that 100% comfortably with the knees. So it may not be that deep, but may be, you may only be able to go down to this point or this point or this point or whatever. But then week by week by week, you just get a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper. Very simple, but very, very useful. Um, and then another thing you can kind of do is experiment with weight distribution in the sense that when we're lunging or when we're doing split squats, one cue that can often help is just really thinking about putting a lot of your weight in this front heel. So as you're coming up and down, you're imagining pushing up and down through this front heel. The idea behind that is sometimes if we've got our weight in the forefoot, that can push the weight into the knee, feel a bit uncomfortable. If we push the weight through the heel, that can actually get the glute working a little bit more, take the weight a little bit away from the knee, can often help. I would sort of say if you can use one, two, or a combination of any of those ideas there with support, range of motion, weight distribution, that will often make things much, much, much more accessible and much, much, much more comfortable. Alternatively, if you're in the position where you're like, hey, this is just still too much, I've done all that and it just doesn't work for me, then you probably just want to look at another option. In the sense that lunges are a great exercise, but there's a lot of different exercises you can do to work the same muscle groups. There's a lot of different exercises you can do to work your quadriceps. If you're looking at building up single leg quadricep strength, which is very beneficial for hikers, you could look at doing step downs. For example, doing something like this, where we're on a step and we're just slowly lowering ourselves down. Now, in this example, I've got a pack on my back, but you can start this with body weight and essentially just pushing down, up and down. This can often be much, much, much more accessible and much more doable if you've got uncomfortable knees than a full-blown lunge. Or another option is doing something like, if you're in the gym environment, doing something like a single leg press, where you're on a leg press, you've got one leg, and you're literally pushing up and down. The beauty of this is you can really adjust how much weight you're using. So you can use a really small amount of weight, slowly build it up over time. There's lots and lots of good options there for single leg quadricep strength, which makes, if you can't really do lunges, it can definitely help quite a bit. So hopefully that gives a few ideas. So with that being said, that's all the questions I've had sent through to me prior to this. So if there are no questions that come through live, I might wrap things up there. For anyone watching in the future, if you do have any questions, follow-up questions for any of this, please do let me know. Or if you do have any questions you would like me to cover in future calls, please reach out and let me know. I'm always happy to help. So with that being said, for anyone listening, hope you've enjoyed it, hope you got a bit out of it, and we'll talk to you all very soon. Take it easy, guys. Bye.